Hi, here is my latest recipe for what I think is a classic British dessert, a Victoria sponge cake.
First you need to preheat your oven to 190 degrees centigrade. Then we're going to start by making the sponge mixture. So get yourself a large mixing bowl and pour in 220 grams of caster sugar and 220 grams worth of butter. Using either an electric whisk or a food mixer, cream the butter and sugar together, and the longer you do it, the better your cake will rise. So I'd recommend about 2 minutes. Once you've creamed the butter and sugar together, we then need to sift in 220 grams worth of self-raising flour, and then also sieve in 1 teaspoon worth of baking powder. Next, you want to get 4 large eggs and crack them all into the mixing bowl along with the flour and the sugar and the baking powder. Once everything's in there, we then need to thoroughly combine all of the ingredients in the mixing bowl together. So again, either using an electric hand whisk or a food mixer, thoroughly combine all of the ingredients together for a good few minutes until it's nice and smooth. Now get yourself 2 circular cake tins and grease them with some butter, and then divide the cake mixture into 2 evenly between the cake tins. Then get yourself a spatula to level out the mixture in the tins. And now we need to put our cake in the oven. So, once it's preheated to 190 degrees centigrade, stick them on the middle shelf for between 20 and 25 minutes, or until the top has gone nice and golden brown. And whilst they're baking away in the oven, we can then prepare the butter icing. So, clean out your mixing bowl and pour in 100 grams worth of butter and 150 grams worth of icing sugar. And starting off slowly to make sure icing sugar doesn't fly everywhere, and again using either a hand whisk or an electric mixer, thoroughly mix the butter and the icing sugar together until it's nice and smooth. Once you have something that looks like this, you can then leave it and set it aside whilst we wait for the cake to cook in the oven. Okay, so after about 20 to 25 minutes, remove the sponge from the oven and check they're cooked. And to do that, get yourself a clean knife, stick it into one of the sponges, and if it comes out clear, you know they're done. Now carefully run a knife around the inside of the tin so you can separate the sponge to get it out. Do this for both of the sponges and then leave them to cool on a rack. Now once the sponges have cooled, and if they have a peak on them, make sure you slice the top off one of them to make it nice and flat. Then get your butter icing and generously spread it over the top of the sponge that you've sliced the peak off of, making sure it's spread evenly. Next, get your other piece of sponge, flip it over and then pour on 150 grams worth of strawberry jam. And again, using a knife, make sure you spread it evenly over the base of the sponge so it's just about dripping off the edge. We now need to put the 2 pieces of sponge together. So get the piece with the butter icing on as your base, and then firmly press on the top piece of sponge that has the jam on. And for a finishing touch, use a small amount of icing sugar and sift it over the top of the cake. And that is how you make a classic Victoria sponge.